How's everybody doing? Welcome to another episode of Howling with the Wolf. I'm Cameron Wolfe, the Wolf. We have a fun week of coverage for me and for Dolphins fans everywhere. I've heard from a lot of people who don't typically pay attention to the Dolphins after the Miami Miracle. So this is the Miami Miracle week of the Howling with the Wolf session. Everybody's still buzzing about that play. Obviously, the Dolphins have a big game this week, but I do want to talk a little bit about that play, about different things that I may not have written about. Hopefully, give you guys some details and answer some questions from behind the scenes of that play and the oral history I did on the Wildcat story as well. So I think it was a very intriguing week, an exciting week for Miami Dolphins fans. And as always, I'm going to look across the NFL and give my take on a few things, including the game that's going to come on in about 15 or 20 minutes if you're watching live. So, as always, thank you guys for joining. The routine is normal. Fire questions away on that channel. Hopefully they're good. If not, I'm going to call you out on it. If they're good, then I'll answer them and give my feedback about whatever you guys want to talk about, whether it's Dolphins, whether it's another NFL team. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in and talk about some Miami Dolphins because the Miami Miracle and a lot of the things that have happened became national news. And then from there, you guys just fire away, and we'll just kind of have some fun with this thing as we go along the day. So first, the Miami Miracle, and some people had asked me this, and I kind of responded a little bit to them, but Miami Miracle was the most exciting and interesting game I've ever covered. Particularly that last sequence. It was wild throughout the game, high intensity, and I thought it was just an amazing experience for fans that were there. And the part for me is I had to completely delete my game story and start over for what I was going to write about for my instant reaction. So we were able to do a lot of cool things out of it. If you guys didn't notice, check out ESPN.com. I was able to do a story, give the locker room scene after the game, and then the next day write an oral history about what had happened from the perspective of the Dolphins and the Patriots players. So I thought we were able to get a lot of good coverage out of that, and obviously a lot of eyes on Miami this week. It was the Lewis said I didn't think Derrick Henry's run would be the second best play of the week. Yeah, it has been a crazy week of big plays, but none bigger than that one. And the crazy part is later that day, the Steelers had a hook and lateral that seemed like it would potentially work, and it actually did work to set up a field goal to go to overtime, and then their kicker missed the field goal. I guess it was meant for the Dolphins to have the spotlight for that day. I think a few things that I took away from that play and overall was just the scene afterwards, and I've written about some of this stuff, but just walking in the locker room and hearing a few of the offensive linemen chant Ted, in reference to Ted Larson, the guy who made the game changing block on that play. Talking to Danny Amendola after the game, and he's telling me that he never seen anything like that before, and that it was fucking crazy. Excuse my language, but it's my channel, so I can do a little bit there. But yeah, it was crazy. Talking to Brandon Bolden about having his big game and then what he was doing on the sidelines. He was talking about how he grabbed Snorris Perry on the sidelines, but Snorris Perry was already running down the field and in celebration. Akeem Spence talked about hugging Adam Gase. Akeem Spence and Leonte Carroo jumped into the stands with fans after that game, watching Adam Gase's stoic reaction to the play, but everybody else going crazy. Brock Osweiler had just looks stunned, just standing there. There's a lot of memorable elements of that play, and I think it's one of those plays that probably goes top three, maybe number one overall, and best plays, most memorable plays in Miami history. So I think that's something that you can be excited about. It's funny, I wrote a Wildcat story that came out the day before, and I think those are probably the two most memorable plays this century, or most memorable games this century for the Dolphins, the Wildcat game and now the Miami Miracle. So I think it was, a great thing for Dolphins fans to see. And as they go upon this next week, we're going to see how they respond from that. I did NFL Live, hit on ESPN, and talked about some of these things. But Adam Gase had a meeting on Wednesday, where essentially he said, put all this behind you. This was a great win, great experience, but we've got a Vikings team coming out that has a really good team overall, but especially a really good defense. And they're between us and the playoffs. The Dolphins are 7-6, and we sort of talked on this spectrum about the playoffs and whether or not that was realistic or not. But you're right now they're at 7-6, and a bunch of other teams are jumbled up in that 7-6 range, and you have to say they legitimately have a chance for the playoffs. Playoffs. Yes, they have a legitimate chance here. So they're going to try to wipe away the memories of Miami Miracle. I know King and Drake is still searching for his ball, and he's selling T-shirts on the way. So there is some remnants of that still throughout the week. But overall, guys tried to turn the page, tried to move on throughout the week. So I think that thing will be something that we in the media and we discuss, particularly throughout the rest of the year and as the season's over. But this team has to find a way to change the channel, change the tune. So I actually did a story on ESPN.com earlier today with Courtney Cronin, the Vikings reporter, that said which miracle was better, the Miami Miracle or the Minneapolis Miracle. And I think right now Minneapolis is winning the poll 2-1, like 66 to like 32 or something like that. And that makes sense. Honestly, I probably would say Minneapolis has the better miracle simply because it was a playoff game. You got to be realistic. Playoff games way more. So even though I think the Miami Miracle had the better play and the more excitement overall, I think that the Minneapolis Miracle meant more and changed the spectrum a lot more. So that's overall my thoughts about that. If you guys have any Miami Miracle questions, go ahead, fire them away. Otherwise, I'm going to move topics. I don't want to bear you guys down with too much on one particular topic. So feel free to end my monologue at any point if you guys want to jump in. I have a few topics that people sent in before, and I'm just going to kind of jump on those. I had a lot of questions when I wrote an Adam Gase story earlier this week, and my column of the week was that Adam Gase should remain the Dolphins coach beyond this season, no matter what happens for the rest of the year. And it predictably got a lot of feedback. People had their take one way or the other, either the no, fire Gase, start over contingency, or yes, this is a plan. He's our best coach since Don Shula. And I don't know if I would, I think that what I was trying to say and what I'll continue through these chats is that Adam Gase has done well with what he's been provided. Yes, he hasn't been the perfect coach. Yes, he's had some struggles with play calling. Yes, his offense is ranked 29th. But given the talent they started off the season with, average at best, given the injuries they've had, 11 players on IR, Ryan Tannehill missing 5 games. For them to be 7-6, coming off a big win against the Patriots, heading into a game where they can essentially control whether they make the playoffs or not, I think that's a lot of credit to the coaching staff. That's a lot of credit for Adam Gase. There's a lot of anger towards Matt Burke. I think he deserves some credit for the games they were winning, particularly without Ryan Tannehill. I think that there's a lot of blame that's often goes on coaching staffs, but I think overall, there should be some credit when good is done. I think one coach who deserves some credit that doesn't get a lot of publicity is Eric Studesville, the running backs coach and run game coordinator. He has really, I think, helped some of the schemes that the Dolphins have been able to run in the run game. I know you guys, if you're a Dolphins fan, have been paying attention to some of the guard and tackle pulling situations that they've had. Those have been influenced by, Studesville coming together and bringing a different mindset into that run game. Frank Gore and King Drake and some of the other backs always compliment him. So I think he's one coach who deserves some credit, who typically doesn't get it. And I think he could be a guy who eventually gets some offensive coordinator or head coach love. So that's just one shout out to him. And I think overall, you look at what the Dolphins are being able to do with the 29th ranked offense, 29th ranked defense. You have to look at their ability to win close games. And one stat I came across when writing stories on the Dolphins and Adam Gase is they're 20-6 and one-score games since 2016, and they're best in the league. Second is New England. So I think that's impressive. That's not just luck. And I think that's going to come huge when you look at the AFC playoff picture. You got teams like Baltimore. You got teams like Tennessee, where I used to cover. You got teams like Indianapolis, all in the mix for probably one playoff spot because it looks like the Chargers or Chiefs or whoever loses that division is going to get the other spot. So I think it's going to come down to who can win close games, who can sneak some games in the road. The Dolphins have been a terrible road team, but they've got 2 road games down the stretch. So I think that we're going to see what this team's made of. I thought that Darren Rizzi said a really interesting thing. I was watching the broadcast of his presser today. He said there's no divas in this locker room anymore. And Adam Gase talked about the toughness of this team. He talked about it being a different vibe this year because of guys having a never say die attitude. And just, we always hear the culture thing and people roll their eyes. But I think you're seeing some of the benefits of guys like Frank Gore, of guys like Danny Amendola in the locker room, of guys like, that have been brought in to help. So I think that's very intriguing. And I think overall that's a good sign for the Dolphins moving forward with Adam Gase, potentially Ryan Tannehill in 2019, whether they draft another quarterback or not. And then with guys like Chris Greer and Mike Tannenbaum running the show, I think Chris Greer, some of his draft picks have shown a lot of growth over the last few weeks. Raekwon McMillan had his best game, Matt Burke said, as a player. I was really impressed with what we saw from Xavier Howard throughout the year. So he's a guy who was a draft pick a couple years ago. And then obviously you have guys like Jerome Baker who's played well throughout the way. These are starters, key contributors. Mika Fitzpatrick probably had his worst game as a pro, and he wasn't even that bad. He was disappointed in it. So I think that those players, those type of impacts that you're able to see are credit to this team and where they are. So let me go ahead and jump into the comment box. You guys are firing away. Justin Turner said, to learn two new teams in 2 years, the way you've done is talent. Titans fans lost his Dolphins game. Thanks, Justin. Justin, had been one of the people who came on my videos a good bit when I was a Titans fan, and he's from Mississippi like me. So shout out to the SIP one time. So thank you for watching, man. It's been a joy. I love football, so I think I'm integrated enough in Dolphins talk now where I can feel comfortable giving my opinion and giving insight on different things. So I still know a good bit about the Titans. I was actually talking to some of their players, throughout the last few weeks. So you keep your relationships, and the Dolphins and Titans can end up fighting for one playoff spot, which would be interesting because that week 1 game comes back and flex. So I think those are things that we watch down the stretch. I think Baltimore is a team to beat for this AFC playoff race. But after that, you look at Tennessee, you look at Miami, and you look at Indianapolis, and it could be a fun race down the stretch. Let's see. Luis Velasquez has a question. Do you think NFL defenses have finally caught up to the highly explosive offenses? Rams, Chiefs, Saints all struggled on offense this week. I do not think that the offensive wave's going away. I think we're seeing some bounce back. It happens from time to time in this league, and like you mentioned, those teams did struggle. But I think what we're seeing is that there's not a straight formula to win in the NFL. We saw the Bears team shut down the Rams because they're an elite defensive team with elite players like Khalil Mack. They can ball. When you got ballers, they get paid on the other side too. So I think that teams are obviously studying other teams and they're figuring out how to neutralize teams. But I think that there's going to be another spell later in the year where we're going to see these offensive teams go off. It might happen tonight. If you're watching live the Thursday night Chiefs Chargers game, I think that game could be in the 30s. So I don't know if it's a spell, teams figuring out other teams. I think it's just some teams match up well with others, and particularly in a matchup between the Bears and the Rams, two teams that don't see each other often, a lot of confusion and a lot of uncertainty happens about which team knows which team. So a lot of times the defense is favored in those sort of matchups. So that's my thought there. But I think the offense and the scoring is still here to stay. Let's see. Frank Forieno. I hope I pronounced that right, my man. And Frank said, "Love your work. Do you think Drake should have been touching the ball more? Gore has been terrific, but Drake is a game changer." Very good question. This is something we've been talking about all year. I'm close with the fantasy football folks at ESPN. Mike Clay, has these questions for me often out there. Matthew Berry, Stephania Bell, who does a really good job with injuries in fantasy football as well. They always ask me, what is Adam Gase doing? Why isn't he playing Kenyon Drake? And that's the question throughout the year, and especially when you have a play like a Miami Miracle where Kenyon Drake shows why he's the best playmaker on the field. You're like, why aren't you seeing more of him? What I can tell you is, look, I think Kenyon Drake should get the ball more. I think he should be a bigger role in the offense. But Frank Gore is balling. And I think Frank Gore impressed a lot of us on what we thought potentially could happen. I thought there was a potential that Frank Gore might be, lower, towards the end of his reign, potentially. And I thought that, maybe he's going to be offsetting Kenyon Drake. Maybe he's going to be, somebody who's supplementing that way. But no, he has been the guy. He has been rolling down. He looks like he has plenty of time left in this game. So I've been extremely impressed with Frank Gore. I know Adam Gase loves Frank Gore. He loves his ability to keep the offense on track. And I think that he believes that Frank Gore makes this team better. And I think that that's a large reason of why you're seeing him play such a big role on the offense when we thought it was going to be Kenyon Drake's show down the stretch. So I think that's ultimately one of your reasons of why, these things are doing it. But I think that you'll see more of Kenyon Drake in the passing game as we've seen in recent weeks. And I think that you'll see the Dolphins be creative. I think the creativity is something that Adam Gase really excels in. And I think you'll see his creativity, particularly when it comes and trying to find these ways to get the running backs on the field. We saw Brandon Bolden, who hadn't played much of any offensive snaps throughout the year, get 2 touchdowns against the Patriots last week. We've seen Kalen Ballard shine in the Wildcats. So I think they figured out ways to get different playmakers on the field, and that's a credit to Adam Gase and his offensive staff, Dow Loggins and folks. And I think we'll continue to see that throughout the year. So thanks for the question, Frank. Felipe Alzamora has another question. He said, "What's up, Cam? What impact will the Vikings firing their OC have on them this week?" A very good question, and then I'm gonna go ahead and jump into a couple central NFL topic questions, and I'll give you my prediction, and then I gotta go watch some football. So thanks as always for joining. To answer Felipe's question, for those who didn't know, the Vikings fired their offensive coordinator this week, John DeFilippo, and promoted their quarterback coach, Kevin Stefanski, I hope I pronounced that right, to offensive coordinator. Mike Zimmer was unhappy with their inability to run the football often or effectively, and he felt like from stuff that came out in the media that DeFilippo may have been trying to further his head coach interest. So that was some speculation that came out through there. Ultimately, regardless, the Vikings weren't playing well offensively. They were being shut down, and they needed to change. So that's where they're at. We actually asked Adam Gase about that this week, and they said that they've had situations like that before, and obviously it changes what they do. But they don't want to go in a deep dive and say, okay, how different the Vikings offense is going to be. Ultimately, their playmakers are their playmakers. And the one thing that's scary about this Vikings team is that they haven't played up to their talent. So if the offensive coordinator was holding them back, maybe a new offensive coordinator can unleash some of their playmakers. They have a top three ultimately receiving core, and with their duo and Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen, and they have a running back, although he hasn't produced well, Dalvin Cook, who's a potential elite running back, and they have a top 5 defense. So on paper, this is a team that the Dolphins don't match up well with, and ultimately that offensive coordinator switch could spark Minnesota, but we could also look at it as a situation where they get really basic this week because they're implementing a new scheme, implementing some different things, and it could hurt them. So I think it could work either way, but I don't think that we're going to see a completely different Minnesota offense just because their OC changed. We may see more runs with Dalvin Cook. We may see more of what Zimmer likes, which is ball control, but I don't think you can change your offense completely in 1 week. So I see your other question, Frank. Let me quickly talk about a couple things NFL-wise. I'll flip back to your question. I can make a prediction, and then I'll let you guys enjoy some game day. Quickly on the NFL topics, I want to talk about there was one thing that came out that I want to talk about because it's a little funny, and it's an ESPN topic, and I actually know this guy pretty well, but there's a thing that came out. I don't know if you guys saw it on Stephen A. Smith earlier today where he was on either SportsCenter or First Take, and he was discussing the Chargers and Chiefs game this night. And he mentioned a few mistakes on air. He mentioned the San Diego Chargers. He mentioned Spencer Ware, who's going to be out tonight, and he mentioned a matchup between Hunter Henry and Derek Johnson. Hunter Henry has been hurt for the year, and Derek Johnson has been, hasn't played for the Chiefs since last year. So it was hilarious, for a lot of people watching, and it was funny for me as well, because you see that and you're like, oh, what's going on? But Stephen A, I will say that he's a hardworking dude. He's really good for ESPN and for the overall thing. And I know I make mistakes. I know I do. So it's like, I think that's I guess a unique side that people can see of journalists, where people like criticize and be like, hey, you don't know football, but he knows football. It's just, you have a lot of responsibilities and you mess up, So I thought that it was funny. It's something that he was able to joke about himself with, which is important. You got to be able to joke with yourself about whatever your mistakes are. But ultimately, I think that it was just a mistake of maybe we working Stephen A a little too hard. But I thought that was one thing I wanted to mention. I also wanted to mention Chargers Chiefs tonight. I got the Chargers. I think they could be the surprise Super Bowl team in this bunch. I think the Chargers are very talented with Rivers, with Keenan Allen out there. And I know they don't have Melvin Gordon tonight, but I think they have a special formula that could go into New England and beat New England. That can go into Kansas City and beat Kansas City. So I think that I'm picking the Chargers tonight. My Miami Dolphins Patriots prediction for this week. I'm actually going with the upset. I'm going with the upset this week. I talked about how Minnesota is a bad matchup for Miami, but I picked Miami to win this game. I think I just put the score in. I think I put 20-17 Miami. There's something weird about this week. And sometimes you get a feel. Sometimes you're like, I don't know why they're going to win, but I get a feeling. And I just get a feel that the Dolphins are going to ride the wave off their Miami miracle. I think they're going to play a close game out there in the Dome in Minnesota. They've been terrible on the road, but I think they're going to find a way. I think they're going to find a way to lean on Frank Gore, lean on King and Drake. And I think they get a couple takeaways from the Vikings and Kirk Cousins. They're third in the league in takeaways, so I think that's going to be the formula for them this week. I think they find a way to get a huge win against the Vikings, and we're going to be back here next week talking about playoffs as a real reality, not just a hope. So that's my thoughts there. X factors for this week, as always, 3 X factors: 2 on the Dolphins, 1 on the opposing team. My number 1 X factor for this game is going to be, let me see, who are we going to have for this game? I want to pick Bryce Butler. Bryce Butler is the receiver the Dolphins picked up. They signed off the street earlier this week to add depth in this receiver. He got a touchdown last week. Adam Gase loves him. He's a fun guy in the locker room to hang around with. I think he DJs in his free time. He's a guy who's lanky, old soul, even though he's still a younger guy. I think that he can make a big impact for the Dolphins down the stretch, and I think he's going to be a X factor. Kenny Stills is going to get a lot of attention after his big game last week. Danny Amendola is the consistent guy over the middle. Devontae Parker is your big receiver. But Bryce Butler is that number 4 receiver, and he's able to stretch the field a little bit with his speed. So I think he's my number 1 X factor for this week. My number 2 X factor for this week is going to be, I think I'm going to pick a combination of Ziggy Hood and Sly Williams. They're going to be my 2 X factor. 2 backup defensive linemen that the Dolphins signed mid-season to help their run defense. They got Dalvin Cook this week. The Vikings are one of the worst run-blocking teams and one of the worst rushing teams in the league, despite having a super talented running back. I think there's a chance that the Vikings go back to the run game and try to implement that this week. Dolphins are one of the worst rush defense teams in the league. So it'll be up to, obviously, the starters and Devon Godchaux and Akeem Spence to stop them. But my X factors are those backup guys. What do you do when your backups are in? They're going to play a big impact. So I think that it's going to be a big game for Ziggy Hood and Sly Williams to step up. And my final X factor is ultimately the guy on the Vikings team that I'm looking for and trying to see how he will play against this team. And my X factor on that side of the ball is going to be, let me think. I'm going to go with Dan Bailey. Dan Bailey, the kicker for the Vikings. For some reason, I just think this is going to be a close game. He's a guy who best Dallas kicker for the longest time. He struggled at points here in Minnesota, and I think at some point he's going to have a field goal to make a difference in this game. Does he make or miss it? And that might decide the game. So those are my three X factors. I'm going to go ahead and answer a couple of you guys' questions, and then we're going to go ahead and get out of here. As always, thank you for joining. I'm trying to take this Howling with the Wolf thing to the next level, and I can't do it without you guys. So thank you as always. Like, share my posts. I post on YouTube a day or two after typically. So subscribe my channel, Howling with the Wolf on there. And hopefully I'm providing content for you guys, whether you're a Dolphins fan, whether you're an NFL fan, that feeds your needs. So thanks as always for joining. I'm going to answer a couple questions, and then we'll get out of here. So Frank Floriano, hopefully I pronounced that right, said if you could add a stud on defense, what position is needed most to fill? Defensive line. Defensive line is a position where the Dolphins will need the most improvement this offseason. They're going to need it from both the interior and the edge of the defensive line. I think you got guys like Andre Branch, who I think it's a decent chance he's gone after the year. You're going to have to make a decision on Robert Quinn, who is having a big salary, but he's had kind of up and down production. Cam Wake's contract is up. He's 36. He's a big pillar of this team, but how long can he continue to play at this level, and are you going to be able to come into agreement on contract? Charles Harris is another guy on that edge who has a former first-round pick who hasn't produced well. And like I mentioned on the inside, you've got Devon Godchaux and Akeem Spence. I think Akeem Spence is on the last year of his deal. Devon Godchaux is coming up on a deal too. So I think that whole defensive line is the position they're going to have to hit heavy at free agency and the draft this year. And you might have to rebuild that whole unit in this offseason. And let's see. I think that is it. Felipe had a mention on Stephen A. saying he's not going to hear the end of this from Will Kane, and he probably won't. It's going to be a fun debate throughout First Take throughout the week. So, as always, thanks, guys, for joining. Share, follow, give me feedback on whatever you think about the channel.